very much for coming out.
Hello, my name is Matthew. I'm an alcoholic. Thank you, Daniela, for inviting me to participate tonight. And thank you, Joey, for your talk earlier. And happy birthday to all the birthdays. And welcome to all the parents. I like it that there's family here. And even family that hasn't been called out is here. Daniela's mom's here today. There, I called her out. I always say a prayer before I come up that I'm going to talk a lot about recovery. I don't want to talk a lot about what it was like, because obviously we're all here. We know what it was like. But I also want you to trust that I'm an alcoholic. And Patty O took me aside a long time ago and said, you have to tell him what it was like. So my sobriety birth date is May 16th, 1993. I'm going to tell you about May 13th, 1993, and hopefully not waste a lot of time on that. Because the truth is, I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I love it with all my heart, with a passion. And I've got a chance to do this a few times, speak at meetings, and I've never successfully conveyed what happens here. I've never, ever been able to do it. Because what happened here for me was very interior. A lot of stuff changed on the outside, but stuff changed inside me that I can't describe, so I'm stuck with this story. So on May 13th, 1993, I weighed 108 pounds. I was sitting on a couch locked my door, and I would hold my breath when the mailman came on my porch, because I didn't want anyone to know I was in there. I didn't know it was the mailman. I was drinking every day. I had had a good family. I had loving parents. My mom and dad were really quite kind to me and loving. I had a lot of respect for them. I was the youngest of four in an Irish Catholic family, and that's a nice place to grow up. There's a lot of love, and people, I make a lot of fun of my Irish Catholic background because I'm in AA. But and we have a family tree riddled with alcoholism, but my parents weren't alcoholics. They were just really nice. And I went to college. My parents worked really hard extra. My mom worked a job. She was a school teacher. So I go to college, and I ended up holding my breath on a couch, I drank myself out of the greatest job I ever had in my life. I was a rock and roll musician. I toured all over the world, made albums, and Joey can relate. I got kicked out of a rock and roll band for drinking too much. That's hard. That's really hard. You got a high bar to get over. But I would miss the bus, and show up in the wrong town. And on my fourth step, it's describing how I borrowed this car from this one college town in North Carolina to drive to this other college town. And my sponsor said, well, what do you mean you borrowed it? And I said, well, the keys were on the seat, and I missed the bus, and I took it. And I left a note when I got to the other end. I said, I took this from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. And he said, that's called grand theft auto. It's not called borrowing a car. And but I was the nice guy, so I borrowed it in my head. But I drank myself out of that job, and I laugh about it now, but I worked all my life for that. I practiced guitar 5 hours a day, and I bought the right equipment, and I aligned myself with the right people, and I worked really hard to write good music, and I developed my skills and my talent, and I ruined my life. And I came home from the East Coast, and I lied, and I told everybody that I came home because my mom was dying of cancer. I grew up in Torrance. And I said, my mom's dying of cancer. And the truth was, my mom was dying of cancer. The lie was, I came home to be with her. I love my mom. I would have done anything for my mom. But if I could stay out there and drink and play music and not come home, I would have missed her funeral. I really would have. And so it was convenient. I came home and said my mom was sick. And I got this job at this. I had this college. I went to college, and I went on the road with a rock and roll band for several years. So I got this job as a waiter at Marie Callender's in Hermosa Beach. And I remember I walked in there, and they hired me, and I thought, this job is so beneath me. I was so arrogant. And then I was there for 10 minutes, and they go, hey, it says on your application that you graduated from college. And I said, yeah. And they go, hey, you want to be the manager? And I was like, that's kind of beneath me too, and that's how I felt. And they showed me around. I'm just telling you the truth. I want to be honest. That's how I felt. And they showed me around this restaurant, and we're walking around with the keys, and they take me up to the office, and they're like, this is how you do the books, and we're going to send you off to training, and here's the schedule for the meat shipments, and here are the keys to the bar. I'm sure the guy said other stuff, but I felt like light came through the window and went, oh, And I thought, this is an awesome job. It's perfect for me. I'm going to be great at this. And I did. I mean, I really went, ooh, that was my only interest, was me feeling better all the time. And that's how I managed that restaurant. You know, I'd get those pesky customers out as soon as I possibly could, and I'd get those 18-year-old waitresses up to the bar and say, drinks are on the house, you know. And the plan was to drink and go home with one of these waitresses, but I would often, very often, stay there till 4, 5, 6 in the morning just drinking, and they'd leave. They'd be like, hey, you want to go somewhere? And I'd be like, not really. You know, I got this. I got the keys to the bar. And then the day they fired me, which shocked me, how can you fire me? This job is beneath me. You know, that was my attitude. But the day they fired me, this 18-year-old waitress came up and said, hey, I'm pregnant. Yeah, that's what I said. And but I said it with so much more feeling than you did. And, you know, I want to be honest. I just want to be honest. You know, if you'd lined up the waitresses and Marie Callender's and said, which one of these do you want to accidentally get pregnant? I would have said, not her. And I know I'm an awful, awful man. I just want to be honest. And you know why? Remember, I'm 31, right? She's 18, and my first thought was, she is so selfish. That was my thought. It's like, she's too selfish to be a good mom. I'm 31. You know, I just totally derailed her life. And my thought was, not her. She's spoiled, you know. And I really thought that. And then I got fired, and they didn't even know about the waitress. They fired me for a list of other infractions. And my pride was so big by then that I pretended. I walked out in the parking lot, the employee parking lot, pretending I knew where my car was. You know, I hadn't seen my car in months, but I was so embarrassed that I acted like I had a car. And I was like, I don't need this job. And I walked out there and I started to cry in the parking lot. You know, at that time I probably weighed a healthy 115 pounds. And I walked around and I walked all the way around the whole block and I went to the bus stop, which oddly enough is right in front of a Alano Club. I just didn't know that. And right next to that Alano Club is a civic center in Hermosa Beach where at that time, they taught young mentally retarded people, like 18 to 25-year-old mentally retarded people, how to live on their own and skills on how to do things. And so I walk up to this bus stop with my Marie Callender's badge, and you know, snot's coming out of my nose, and I look like hell. And there's about 8 or 9 mentally retarded people waiting for the bus, and I'm standing there waiting for the bus, and the bus just can't come fast enough for me, you know. And so I stepped off the curb on the Pacific Coast Highway to look and see where the bus was, and like 10 mentally retarded people yelled, don't stand in the street! Don't stand in the street! And they scared the crap out of me. And really, I jumped back on the curb and I was like, where's the bus? You guys see a bus? And I got on the bus and I got home and I tried to drink myself to death. I walked into my apartment and I said, I am not going to come out of here. I'm going to die in here. Because my life is just a wreck. And I sat in there and I sold my guitars and I sat in there for 7 months. And I drank, and I drank, and I drank, and I would call my mom in moments of lucidity and say, hey, I'm going to come visit you, Mom, because my mom was dying 2 miles away. And I thought when I called, I'm going to go. I thought, I'm going to go see my mom. I really am. And I loved my mom. I really did. You know, my mom had this wonderful, quiet dignity. She was just a really loving person. And my father was really respectful. My father worked really hard, and he was kind of a funny Irish guy. He told a lot of stories and stuff, but he just so respected my mother. You know, he never said anything bad about her in public. They didn't put each other down. They just weren't that kind of people. They just were like shining examples of a love story. And I thought I was going to go see my mom. I really thought I was, you know. And I go to the door, and on my way to the door, I'd see myself in the window, and I go, God, man, you're not looking so good. And I'd go to the refrigerator, and if I didn't have anything in there, I'd take something and sell it. And I remember I gave the liquor store guy all this stuff for collateral, and he took all my stuff. And I'd get drunk, you know, and I never went. I wanted to. I meant to go. I wanted to see her. I wanted to be a good son, you know, but I didn't. And, you know, I described my parents' marriage. I told you how in love they were. And, you know, when that girl was 8.5 months pregnant, I pushed her down a flight of stairs, you know. And I didn't do that because I wanted to hurt that baby. I did not do that because I wanted to hurt that baby. And I didn't do that because I wanted to hurt that girl. I didn't. But I want to be honest with you. And where alcoholism took me to a place where I didn't have a feeling inside of me for them. I just didn't. And she wanted me not to drink. She didn't want me to quit drinking. She wanted me not to drink that day for something that we needed to do. And I pushed her off the porch, and I saw her start to fall, and I closed the door, and I heard her fall. And I went inside, and I sat on the couch, and I proceeded to hold my breath when the mailman came. That's what happened. That's what it was like, okay? I became an animal. I started off with every advantage. I had every advantage, and I drank myself into becoming an animal. I never went to see what happened to her. I wasn't even curious. So on May 15th, 1993, my brother, who's next above me, but he's 6 years or 7 years older than me, he called and said, hey, it's Mother's Day, and he said, it's Mother's Day, and I know you're having car trouble. Because in an Irish Catholic family, if you can't find your car, that's car trouble. And we don't like to embarrass each other, so we just say, hey, I know you're having car trouble, so I'm going to come over and get you. And this brother was the alcoholic in the family. He was, at that time, like 11 years sober. And he said, I'm going to come pick you up, take you to Mother's Day. So he picked me up. I put a clean shirt on my dirty body and waited out in front of my apartment because I didn't want him to see my apartment. And I went outside, and he took me down to the King Harbor Yacht Club in Redondo Beach, where my mom and dad and my brother and my sister were waiting. And my dad looked so nervous. You know, my mom was really sick. And my dad, at that time, they were married for 45 years to each other. And my dad just looked terrified. You know, he was trying to act like everything was okay but his wife was dying, you know. And I walked in, and they all looked at me, and they all looked aghast. And I acted like I didn't notice. And then I sat down, and I started babbling. I thought, if I just talk enough, they won't notice that I weigh 108 pounds, you know. They won't notice that I haven't had a job in 7 months, or that this girl's pregnant, or whatever happened to Matthew, you know. And, you know, they eventually just closed me out of that circle. They just stopped talking to me. And you know, I've had so many moments of bitter and incomprehensible demoralization behind alcohol. I've had so many of them. I've done things to other people that I never thought I would ever do to another person. And I've let things be done to me that I never thought I'd ever let be done to me, to get loaded. And but that moment when my family turned away, that was the worst one. And I don't know why. I'm just being honest. I want to report to you. That was the worst one. And if you saw the movie, you'd go, nope, that was not the worst one. But I'm telling you, I was in the movie, and it was absolutely the worst moment of my life. I don't know why. I just felt like I got sent to Mars to live by myself. And my brother drove me home, and on the way home, we got in an argument. I don't know what it was about. Neither of us knows what it's about. I went into my apartment, and he drove off, and I was so mad at him that I wanted to continue this argument. So I called him up when he got home, and I'd love to know. You know, I'm this guy who hasn't had a job. I haven't visited mom. This unwanted teenage pregnancy. I got all these, you know, and that's just the tip of the iceberg, believe me. You know, I want to say that. You know, I've described what it was like on the outside just a little tiny bit. But what it was like inside of me was so much uglier than any of that. It was so much worse inside of me. It was just horrible and dirty in there. And my brother picked up the phone, and after I yelled at him for a while, he said, you know, Matthew, I think you might have a problem with alcoholism. And I don't know why I said this. I look back at this moment on May 15th, 1993, as probably the moment where God advanced me just a little bit of grace. Because I said back into the phone, I said, of course I do. And I don't know why I said that. I had been denying that. You know, I denied it to all the managers and the record people and the band, and I denied it to all the girls who I was going to marry in college. All their parents were like, walk with me, talk with me. You're not marrying my daughter, you know. You need to stop drinking, son. And I'd be like, no, my brother's an alcoholic. He lives in his car. I'm a success. I graduated with honors. I have a record contract. I'm touring all over the world. But I was a full-blown alcoholic. So my brother said, you have a problem with alcoholism, and for some reason I took the first step. I admitted it. And he came rushing over. And on his way over, I thought, maybe he'll come over here and he'll kick my ass, and I'll never drink again. And I actually thought that, and you know, I'm trying to set up how this felt. Is I wanted someone to do that. I was dying for someone to do that because I felt so filthy. But I was arrogance all over on the outside. So when he came over, he didn't do that. He did something totally the opposite of that. He said, let's go down to the beach. And we walked down to the beach, and we sat on this lifeguard stand. And I remember I had a pack and a half of Marlboro Reds. I didn't want to go without some kind of substance. And I'm smoking these cigarettes, and he starts talking to me about how he felt when my mom and dad kicked him out of the house when he was 18. And I remember that because it was such a bummer that day. And he started talking to me about how he felt when his wife and child said, I never want to see you again. And I remember that. And he started talking to me about how he felt living in his car. And right in the middle of it, he started describing how I felt sitting on that lifeguard stand. And I was so surprised. I was so surprised because I didn't think anybody in the world knew how I felt. And the last person I would have ever guessed would have been him. I would have thought, no way. But here he was. It's just like the big book. It's just like Ebby and Bill. He was clear-eyed. He was honest. I knew he was seeing my mom all the time. I knew he had a good job. I knew he had an honest marriage. And he was sitting there, and I was like, how do you get from here to there? And I'd like to tell you I saw the light and surrendered, but I ran out of cigarettes. I mean, I want to be honest. That's what happened. I looked down and thought, he is not going to stop talking. And I got nothing left to put in me for the next 20 minutes, and I really need something all the time. So I threw up my hands, and I said, hey, you know what? You're right. I should go to Alcoholics Anonymous. And then my brother came back into this guy, my Irish Catholic sarcastic brother, and he looked right in my face, and he laughed. He goes, dude, you're not going to AA. He goes, you're going to a hospital. And I looked at him, I go, well, I can't do that. I'm busy. And you guys are laughing, but you know what I mean, right? Like I thought I was busy. That's the sickest part. I go, well, how long do I have to go? He's like, I don't know, like 30 days. And I go, yeah, I can't leave all this for 30 days, Who's not going to pay the bills? I'm the guy not paying the bills there, Who's not going to answer the telephone? I'm the guy that doesn't answer the telephone at this place. That was going through my head, and he just ignored me and said, hey, you know what, we'll figure something out. And on May 16th, 1993, the phone rang, and I thought it was my brother coming to get me, so I answered the phone. I had been up all night getting ready for rehab, and, I wanted to show him I meant business, and it was not my brother. It was some woman. I don't know who it was. And she said, hey, we've been looking all over for you. Your daughter was born, and we couldn't find you. And I ran out, and I found my car, and I think this is a great example of alcoholism. They talk about this is a disease of selfishness and self-centeredness, and that's really true for me. That is so absolutely true for me. And I look back at my life and think this is such a great example. I found my car, and I went to the hospital where I was born, because that's where babies come from, right? And although I had been told where this baby was going to be born, and I went to Little Company America, because that's where babies are. And they were looking at me like, no, but you need some help, And I remember, I go, oh, right. And I went to the right hospital, and I ran up to the maternity ward, and I ran into that room, and, Anna was glad to see me. She was really glad to see me, and that was so embarrassing, And she came over to me with this beautiful baby, and she handed me Phoebe, and she said, hey, isn't she beautiful? Look at our daughter. And I looked at this person, this I don't know how, I have never been able to describe this, just like innocence and spirit. I just looked at this beautiful, clean spirit, and I've never felt uglier or dirtier in my entire life. And I said a prayer to myself. I said, God, I hope these two people never see me again, because I'm going to do something stupid, and something really bad's going to happen. Someone's going to get hurt. And I just don't think this is a good thing. And I gave the baby back, and I went back to my apartment, and I was going to go back in there and drink myself to death. Periodically, I would open a window, and my roommate who moved away but kept the room had a gun, and I would put this hollow tip bullet in the gun, and I'd stick it in my mouth and stand in front of this window. And I'd pray for the guts to shoot myself. And the reason I opened the window, I'm a good Catholic school kid, so I took the screen off and opened the window thinking I'll just blow my brains out in the lawn and then nobody will have to clean up, I was a conscientious suicide. But you know what? I look back, I carried that bullet around with me for a long time when I was sober. I carried it around for like 3 years because I used to tell myself, this is how bad it got. This is how bad it got. And then one day I looked at that bullet and it said to me, this is what a self-centered little puke you became. Because I had a baby on the way. I had a mom dying of cancer. I had a lot of people who were wanting to love me. And my big answer was, well, they won't have to clean up. But my brother was sitting on my porch, and he said, you know what? Where are you going? Where were you? And I said, I was at the hospital my daughter was born. And he didn't say anything. He didn't say congratulations. He didn't smile. He just said, let's go to the hospital. And I went to this hospital, and I came out 28 days later, and honest to God, all I remember about that hospital is that I gained 47 pounds. I know a whole bunch of stuff happened, and I'm sure I made lifelong friends. But I got out, I went back, I walked into my apartment, and somebody handed me a beer. Actually, it wasn't a beer, it was a Coors. And I held on to that for a minute and looked at those people and thought, Matthew, all you have in the world is 30 days of sobriety. That's all you have. You don't have any character. You don't have any integrity. You don't have any money. You don't have any friends. And I wasn't going to blow all I had in the world on these guys. So I walked backwards, put that beer down, and I ran to a payphone, and I called AA. And I told them almost everything I've told you so far. I was like, I got this baby. I'm at the hospital. And I was a little wound up. And I yelled into the phone. I got it all out. And then the guy very beautifully, he said, well, where are you? And I said, I'm on this corner. I'm on this street corner. And he said, there's a meeting right across the street, right now. And I walked across the street, and I walked into this meeting, and my life began. I was scared to death. I was scared to death. I walked in. I didn't know anybody. There were a couple of my brother's friends there, but it was a big meeting. It was bigger than this. There was like 500 people there. And I sat down in the middle of it, and the speaker got up, and he had a suit on, and I remember the speaker said, wah, 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 wah. I remember that really clearly. And he talked like that the whole time, and you guys were nodding and smiling, and I didn't feel any better. But I got up, and I walked out, and one of my brother's friends said, hey, where are you going? And I said, he goes, can I give you a ride home? That's what he said. And I said, I don't have a home. And he said, well, tell me about that. And I told him about the Coors and the people in my apartment. And he said, well, let's go to your mom's and dad's house. And I want to make how many people here are in their first year of sobriety? Wow, a lot of you. Right on. Well, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. Good for you. I want to tell you something that's going to be comforting, I hope, is your perception of reality and reality itself are two completely different things. And that's really, really good news. I'm not talking down to you. I would never, ever talk down to you. I really wouldn't. I want to tell you, I moved in with my mom and dad, right? My mom and dad were married for 45 years together. My mom was dying of cancer. Couldn't have been a worse situation, right? Their loser son moved in with them. I thought it was humiliating and embarrassing for them. I thought it was humiliating and embarrassing for me. I thought it was the worst possible scenario that could possibly happen. But you know what was really happening? That was my perception. You know what reality was? My mom and dad were married for 45 years. My mom was dying of cancer. And the person they loved the most, who was dying in the street, moved into their house. And his eyes were clear. And he had 30 days of sobriety. And he went to a meeting every morning. And he went to a meeting at noon. And he went to a meeting at night. And I held my dad when he cried. And I changed my mom's diapers. It was perfect. It was perfect. It was beautiful. I just couldn't see it. I grew more in that year than I've ever grown in my entire life. I became so close to those people. I want to tell you a million things about sobriety, but I have to tell you a couple things that are really key for me. One of them was, I have a problem with the word God. And I'll tell you about that. I want to talk about the God thing. I went to Catholic school. I can't tell you how weird it is standing up here. This wasn't my life plan to stand in front of the altar. But I went to Catholic school, and I had a problem with the word God. And I want to tell you about the God thing, my perception of that is, my first week of sobriety, after I moved in with my mom and dad, I went to this men's step study on Tuesday night in Redondo Beach. And I went there, and I didn't know anybody. And I went and got coffee, and I filled my coffee up too much. And when I was walking to my seat, I burned my hand. And I acted like I didn't. I was like, it's fine. And because I was sure you were all looking at me, right? And you were all making fun of me and like, look at the new guy. And I got this scalding hand, and I walk over and I sit down, and I can't drink the coffee because my hand's killing me. And everybody's sitting in a circle, and you couldn't share unless you worked the step. And I immediately went, great, I'm good. And then they started talking like Charlie Brown's parents. Everybody, wah, 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 And as soon as that meeting was over, I ran out the door. And I went back to my mom's and dad's house, where I was equally uncomfortable. I got to go to that place where I was uncomfortable, and then in the morning I'm like, I got to get out of here. I think I'll go to a meeting where I will be terribly uncomfortable. And I did that. And the next week I went back. The next Tuesday I went back, and I walked in there, and I had learned. I filled my coffee up halfway. And I went back to my seat with, some confidence, and I looked around, and when I looked around that room, there were people sitting in the same seats as the week before. And that really struck me. I want to say that out loud. If you do that at your meeting, that's being of service. Because I went, wow, these guys take this really seriously. They were here last week in these seats. And then they started talking. I didn't hear a lot, but I heard some people be I thought, a little too candid and honest. And then everybody was like laughing and supporting them. And I started to relax a little, just a little. And on the next Tuesday, I didn't want to go back. I did not want to go back, but I was crawling up the walls in my old bedroom at my parents' house. So I went back, and I started to hear them, and my shoulders started to get more relaxed, and I started to feel better. And all I did is I went. I didn't do anything. And all this other stuff happened, stuff way beyond my control, outside of my power, by definition, by physical definition. Those guys showed up, sat in the same seats. Somebody made the coffee. Somebody stood by the door. They came every week. All those guys worked the steps so they could share about those steps. I started to hear them just by repeating going there. All this stuff, a conspiracy of coincidences took place, and I healed inside. So when I'm at a meeting and I'm standing out there and somebody with 6 months or a year of sobriety has a year of sobriety, they couldn't get sober before they got to AA, just like me, is standing there and they go, I got a problem with the God thing. I feel like that's like driving down the 405 at 80 miles an hour and turning to your passenger and going, I got a problem with the engine thing. Maybe you guys, it works for you, but I'm a thinker, I wish I had what you had, like you simpletons. But I can't handle it. The God thing's happening. It's right here. I'm sober. Couldn't do it. You're sober. You're here. But we think this word God, I went to Catholic school. I remember Sister Dennis Ann looking at me when I was 14 going, if you're thinking about sex right now, you're going to hell. I was like, uh-oh. And then I looked around at all my buddies and I went, hell is going to be awfully crowded because I know these boys, And, I was 14. I was going through puberty. And I'm not kidding. I was trying to be good. I was trying to be good like they told me good looked, and I knew I was failing every day. I knew I was failing personally and privately. I never lived up to God. And when I came here, I had a problem with the word God. I didn't have a problem with the God thing. I just had to figure that out. I had to get out of my head and into my eyes, into my skin, into my ears. But I went to my sponsor about the 11th step, and I said, I don't get this prayed only for knowledge of God's will for me and the power to carry that out. That just seems so ambiguous and weird. I don't know how to do that. What's God's will for me? And he didn't answer me right away, which I really was grateful for. He thought about it. And he had a lot of time. And he came back the next meeting, and I brought it up again, because I was doing the steps, man, and my life was changing. I did a real thorough 5th step. I thought I was going to get hit by lightning. I thought Sister Dennis Ann was watching. But I didn't. And I started paying the money back. I started doing all the work. And my life was really changing, on the inside. I was getting a little bit cleaner, just a little bit cleaner. And he said, Matthew, I think you're making this too complicated. He said, I think when the alarm clock goes off, that's God saying, get up, When Phoebe's diaper needs changing, that's God saying, it's time to change a baby, And when a bill comes in the mail and says, pay this amount, God's going, hey, pay that amount. That's, just do the next indicated thing, and you're doing God's will, And I want to just say out loud right in front of everybody that Anna, Phoebe's mom, turned out to be the greatest mom ever, the greatest girl ever to get pregnant. I hit the lottery when I got that girl pregnant. Phoebe's 17 years old. We both had our birthday May 16th, a couple weeks ago. We gave her a car. Anna and I gave her a car. Not a new car, but a car. We put a bow around it. My wife was there. Her husband was there. We were laughing. That's AA. That's what AA can do for you. So I got this do the next indicator thing, and I started doing that, and I was at this meeting, and I got a job in this really convoluted way, and I don't have time to tell you about it, but it was really a spiritual experience for me, and I finally got a decent job, because I was working at a loading dock, and I was driving a truck, and I didn't think those jobs were beneath me, by the way, not even for a second, not at all. If I could stay sober and somehow pay something, I was good. I was paying child support, I was doing all that stuff, and I got this job at the airport, at a big airline, working behind the counter. I got hired by a guy who was the vice president of the airline. He was in AA, so I couldn't really tell anybody at the airport why I got hired by the vice president. And nobody trusted me, and partly that was my fault, because first of all, I was the mole hired by the guy, right? And also, I remember like my first week after training, I'm sitting at the counter. This actually happened. And this guy next to me, the guy next to me turns to me and he goes, "God, isn't this job hell? This is just hell." And I go, "Oh no, man, this is not hell. I have been to hell. This is awesome." Yeah. So they're like, "Okay, don't trust the new guy," and so on my way to work, I bought a guitar. I bought a Taylor Dan Curry model single cutaway. So if you play guitar, you're jealous of me now. And on my way to work, I got there and I wanted to show somebody. I got this beautiful guitar, and I ran in and I wasn't the cool guy at work, and that's cool because I'd been the cool guy at work lots of times. I always got fired, always. So I just went and put my guitar in the locker, and that night when I got out, I went to I wanted to like rip the case open and hold it up above my head and go, "Look," to someone. And I worked all night, and I got to the employee bus like 10:30 at night where all the airlines come out, and we get on this employee bus, and there's this woman from British Airways standing next to me. I'd never seen her before in my life. And I turned to her and I said, "Hey, can I show you my new guitar?" And she turns to me and she said, "I don't look at strange men's guitars." And she got on the bus. And I thought, I think she thinks I'm trying to hit on her. And I'm not. I just want to show somebody this guitar. And so I get on the bus, and we're like pressed together. The bus is packed. She's right next to me. And she's very uncomfortable, right? So she has a C.S. Lewis book in her hand called Surprised by Joy. And I'd read the book, so I thought, I'm going to make this cool. I'm going to calm everything down. And I said, "Hey, I've read that book. What do you think?" And she said, "Well, cut to the chase. Do you believe in God?" And I almost spit on her. I went, "God saved my life!" Like boom, and all the blood drained out of her face. And bad pickup line number 2 at the airport. And she got all kind of shaky and stuff. And I thought, Jesus Christ, Matthew, calm down, So I said, "Well, what do you think?" I remember Dear Abby came into my head, and she said, "If you want people to be interested in you, get interested in them." So I said, "Well, what do you think of the book?" And she said, "I don't know. I'm kind of on the fence." And we started talking about God. And as she's talking with this amazing British accent, I'm going, "Man, she's pretty." She had blue eyes and dark hair, and she was really, really pretty. And I was relaxed. So we get off the bus, and I go, "Hey, want to forget about this guitar maybe and have dinner sometime?" And she did not think so. She was like, "Oh, right, look at my guitar. I've read that book. Do you believe in God?" And she's like, "I have to be able to wait for this bus. I'm an employee of this airline." No, like really mad at me. And she walked off, right? And I knew that I had grown spiritually because I went to work the next day, and I didn't tell anybody she was a lesbian. It's like, that's all right. I mean, I'm okay. You're okay. We're good, I told that story at the Pacific Palisades, and this woman waited after the meeting, and she came up to me and she said, "Matthew, I'm a lesbian." And I said, "That's great." And she said, "You know how I know I'm a lesbian?" I said, "No, how do you know?" And she said, "I'm not attracted to you." So if you're not attracted to me, ladies, anyway, it's a little aside. But I'm not really kidding. What I'm trying to say is it was a spiritual awakening for me because I walked away from that bus and I thought, I made her uncomfortable. I said the wrong thing. She didn't really understand that I'm really innocent and I was just interested in getting to know her better. That's too bad. And I felt calm. And that, for me, was a spiritual awakening. I was starting to be clean enough inside to be comfortable in my own skin where if I got rejected, I didn't have to burn your house down. And I came to work the next day, and I'd like to tell you I didn't think about it, but I only thought about it about 28 times, just about 20 times, because she was over there. And then I went to the bus that night, and she comes walking up, and I'm like, oh, my God, maybe she won't recognize me. I don't have a guitar in my hand. That's what I thought. And she tapped me on the shoulder, and she said, hey, you know what? I think I might have been rude to you last night. Would you like to miss this bus and have coffee with me tonight? And we've been married for 15 years. Come on. What, a guy converts a lesbian and that's all he gets out of you people? Come on. Miracles here. So, and you're probably, if you're in your first year, going, what the hell does this have to do with Alcoholics Anonymous? And I want to tell you, everything. Absolutely everything. Every element of that story has to do with my sobriety. I did the work. I changed, My wife, she proposed to me 2 weeks after that cup of coffee. And we are madly in love with each other. I kiss the ground every day that woman married me. I've never lied to my wife. I can look all of you in the eye and tell you I've never lied to my wife, and I don't know where this guy came from. I remember when I got married, I said to my sponsor, she's not blonde, she's not anorexic, she's not addicted to heroin, she's just really not my type, and he said, yeah, I know. You've changed. You've attracted something better, And my wife is such an interesting person, She said, why don't we get married in Crystal Lake, Illinois, so that your mom, before she dies, can go back to where she was born, because she didn't want to go. And I said, God, you'll move our whole wedding. And she said, let's do that. Let's just have a little family wedding. And we all went to Crystal Lake, and my mom got to go there. And we have this little crappy house on the lake. We bought it in 1922, and it's exactly the same. But it's got this big lawn, and it's got this little pier. And I walked out on the pier because she was going to walk across that lawn and marry me, And I went down on that pier, and I stood on that pier, and I swear to you, this is the prayer I said that day. I looked up at this beautiful sky. It was blue, and there were white clouds. And I said, God, thank you that this is the next indicated thing to do. This is so great. This woman's going to come across here and marry me. The next indicated thing isn't always a dirty diaper and an alarm clock and a bill. Sometimes the next indicated thing makes your heart blow up in your chest with joy. A lot. It happens a lot. Philippa and I have 2 other children. I have Rory, my son, and I have Sophie. And I was in the car with Pip, and I took her to the hospital, the right hospital, and I had the insurance. And Anna, Phoebe's mom, came to both the births. She wanted Phoebe to be there, And I want to tell you the truth. I want to tell you about AA, and I want to tell you about my life. And what it sounds like is, hey, that guy came to AA and sunshine started coming out of his ass, And I want you to know that didn't happen, I've looked, I got a full-length mirror, but I don't like it when people make it sound like that, because that's not the truth. That's not what happens here. That's not what happens here. Good things happen here and bad things happen here. My parents died. Both of my parents died right in front of me. I watched them. I was holding my mom when she died. But I'd made amends to my parents, and it wasn't an awful, horrible scene. It was a perfectly natural event. When I was about 8 years ago, so I was married for 7 years, I walked in my house, and my wife was on the ground, and her carotid artery had dissected. And she lost a good deal of her brain. She had a massive stroke. And I found her on the ground, and I called an ambulance, and I got in the ambulance, and I walked away from my children. My children were really little. I just walked out of the door. I couldn't think, And people came and took my kids to their house. And I got in this ambulance, I called my sponsor, I called my wife's parents in England, and I called my sister, my closest living relative. And they took me to this hospital, my wife's at this hospital, and they took one look at her, and they said, this woman may not live tonight. We need to get her in a helicopter down to UC Irvine. So they landed a helicopter on Katella, where Disneyland is. They stopped the street. And I walked out in that helicopter, and I felt like I was in a Twilight Zone. The love of my life was bleeding out. And I went out there, and we flew to this hospital, and they were going to do this fancy thing and save her, and they all walked away from her. Said, we can't do it. It's not going to work. And I walked out into the, just like Joey, I walked out into the waiting room of ICU at midnight, and it was full of guys from my Monday Night Men's Day. And the big lesson was, hey, Matthew, You're not by yourself here. You're not alone, you know. And I got to tell you, that was a big lesson. And I went back inside to that hospital, and I stayed there. I only got to stay there for 10 days. You know, I got this job. I got a job I always wanted. I'm a drug dealer. I'm a pharmaceutical salesman. And I just want my money back. And I got this job, and I told my sponsor, I said, hey, I just finally broke into this industry, and I need to go to Chicago for 4 weeks, like next Tuesday, so I should just call and tell him I can't come, right? He goes, why? And I said, my wife's in ICU. He said, well, let's see what happens, but I think you should go. And I said, my wife is in ICU. And he said, are you a doctor? I said, no. And he said, are you the breadwinner of your family? I said, yeah. And he goes, why don't you go to Chicago, don't tell anybody your wife had a stroke, and just be a work among workers. We'll take care of it. And my wife lived. She made it through the hardest part. She's damaged. She's brain damaged, and she's paralyzed on her left side completely. And she's not the same anymore. But I went to Chicago. And I couldn't believe I went to Chicago. Who does that? But my sponsor's always done things in my best interest. And he really said, dude, you got to do this, and we'll be all right. And my wife had 72 men visit her. Men, I go to men's stag meetings. The nurse said, are you a famous madam? She said, all these men come all the time, you know. And I flew home. I got to tell you about this spiritual experience. I hope I don't go over time, but I want to just tell you about something that happened. I would call her every day. And I would have to listen to the 10 and 15 and 20 messages from you guys. Hey, we took care of your wife today. We got her some food from outside of the hospital. We put your Christmas lights up today. We fed your kids today. I hope that's okay. How could I drink? How could I drink, you know? I got into AA where you get into AA. You know, we go to panels. We sponsor everybody. We're tight. How could I drink after those messages? And I came home halfway through my training to visit my wife, and I kind of snuck home. I went to the hospital. It was late at night, and I ran in there to see her. I couldn't wait to see her because you guys were telling me how good she looked, and she did not look very good. She looked terrible. And I crawled into bed with her, and I hugged her. I put my arms around her, and I woke up bolt upright in the middle of the night, filled with fear, terrified. What am I going to do? I got a 1-year-old, I got a 5-year-old, I got an 8-year-old. My wife's never going to walk again. She's going to be brain damaged permanently. What am I going to do? I got out and I walked down to the showers, and I thought, well, I'll take a shower. And I went in there, and I remembered that my sponsor said, pray with intention. Pray with intention. So I got on my knees and I prayed with intention. And I prayed, God, I don't need you to heal my wife. I don't need you to make me a lot of money, but I need a little power. I just need a little power because I don't think I'm up to this. I felt like I was going to have a nervous breakdown in the hallway on the way to that shower. And I got back up and I started walking back to my room, and nothing had changed. I felt I could taste metal in my mouth. I was so afraid. I don't know how else to describe. I can't really tell you how afraid I was. And each step I thought, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to make it. That prayer stuff, it doesn't work. And I walked in, and the room was completely dark. And I sat down on the chair next to my wife, and I closed my eyes. And I thought to myself, wow, I can feel Philippa in this room. I can feel her in here with my eyes closed. I wonder if that's like a sixth sense of when you really connect with someone, if you love them that much. Because I thought if I were in a big hotel and I were blind, I could probably find her. And I got up and I turned and I looked over the top of her bed. I wasn't ready to look down at her again. And I looked over the top of her bed, and there was this big window, and it was like 4:45, 5 in the morning, and it was just barely light enough so there was a silhouette of trees. And I could see these birds flitting around in these trees. And I thought, geez, this is a beautiful world. The world is beautiful. It's just a beautiful place. And I looked down at my wife, and she was glowing. You know, she's from Wales. She has this beautiful pale skin and this dark hair. She looked so beautiful. And I thought, oh my God, I love her. And there was no fear. That was 8 years ago. It's never come back. Not for a second. God just changes my perspective. He doesn't change my circumstance. You know, I don't want anyone else to be my wife. And I don't want my wife any different than she is today. And if you're wondering what that miracle is, where they say, don't leave before the miracle happens, that stupid saying. Don't you love that? You get 90 days. Don't leave before the miracle happens. And you're like, I got 90 days. I thought that was the miracle. And, you know, I'll tell you what the miracle is. I came here an animal. I pushed a perfectly fine human being down a flight of stairs. I didn't even care. I get to dress my wife today. I get to take care of my children with that wonderful person who gave birth to them. I'm a human being. Thanks for letting me share.